We'll wait a few minutes for people to log on. Okay, we'll get going in just a second. We're seeing people log on now. It is Tuesday, September 21st, 9/21/21. From a stock market standpoint, not really much of a recovery from yesterday. I know people asked about that yesterday. Not much of a recovery, but still, it is what it is. I think by the end of the week, we'll see most of that come back. From a news standpoint, we won't go over much today because we want to have Cristy on. Yesterday, we couldn't get the technical aspects working correctly. But remember, if you don't watch this live, it is live on the Facebook page. It is recorded on the Facebook page forever. So I know there are people who watch it later at night when it's not live and they post questions and then they wonder why I didn't answer them. It's because I'm not live at that moment. So please, you can email me a question, or you can wait till the next day and ask the question, or you can just send a message to Brantford 7 and I'll answer it. I did get a few phone call messages saying, how come Steve never answers my question? Because it's at 9 o'clock at night. I'm not live then. I'm only live at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we're going to bring Cristy in a second. This week, tomorrow we have Brett Jolie, who's a Democratic candidate for the Board of Ed. We have one tentatively scheduled for Thursday, and then next week we have Peter Burdon on Wednesday. We're filling in with all the members. Our goal is to invite every member running for the Board of Ed on. So everybody gets a chance to have their opinion heard and their thoughts on the Board of Education. So I'll bring in Cristy now. Cristy, how are you?
Good. Thank you, Steve. How are you?
I'm very good. I can hear you. You can hear me.
Yes.
All right, you're coming in good. So this is good to see. Okay. So I'm going to start the same way we started yesterday. And that is, I want to know first a little bit about yourself, your background, your career, family, that sort of stuff. Why don't you give us a little introduction?
Okay. Yeah. So yesterday I told you some of my life story. So I'll just tell you a little bit about my time in Brantford. I moved here in 2003. I'm a mom of two. I'm a social worker, very proud of that. I work at Yale New Haven Hospital right now and also at Yale University. And hi, Jennifer. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I mean, I've been involved in the school systems as a parent for about 11 years. My son is a junior and my daughter's a fifth grader. That's how I started to become involved and interested in all of this.
Okay, so your kids are how old again?
10 and 16, so they're one is in Walsh and one is in the high school.
Okay. Schools. Now, my first interaction with you is not as a Board of Ed member. My first interaction with you was working to get a successful effort, I should add, to get new playground equipment at Hammer Field. And you did a good job with that, and you were a pretty active parent with that. So, a lot of these parents that are just getting involved, they got involved to get schools reopened. You kind of ran a campaign like that a few years back when you were pushing to get that playground equipment done. So good job on that. About community activism is part of that point.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about your running. Now, you've been on the Board of Ed for how long?
Well, let me just say a little bit more about that playground because it was an amazing collaboration, I think, and it really taught me a lot about partnering with parents and the power of parents coming together. And I know that there's a lot of parents right now who are very engaged, and I think that's great because the thing that I learned then is that you really need to partner with community, other community members. And at that time, DRTM helped to fund us, as did Alex Paluzzi, who was key in making that happen. So that to me was just such a positive experience, and coming together with other moms, Stephanie Carbon, Robin Comey, Katie Bradley, I want to give them credit too. So that kind of set the stage for knowing that if you get involved, you can get great things done. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, you're on the Board of Ed now, but you were not elected. When did you get on the Board of Ed?
Yeah, I was appointed, I think, February 2020. So it was all pre-pandemic. And I think I got sworn in that April. So
So April 2020 was when you were sworn in?
Yeah.
So your entire time so far on the Board of Ed has been the pandemic?
Yeah, it's been
Okay.
crisis after crisis. Yeah. I mean, I am somebody who did go to a lot of board meetings previously.
Yeah, I know you
Not
did.
every time like other people who are also very interested, but I did pay attention and spoke up when I felt like I needed to. So I know I've stood in front of the microphone, making statements, and I know how it is. It's a little nerve-wracking if you're not used to speaking in public. So every time I see a parent up there, I put myself back in their shoes, and I understand what it's like to make those points in front of everyone, and you want to be eloquent, but you're nervous.
So you had an advantage of being on the parent side and also on the Board of Ed side. When you went from being just a parent to a parent on the Board of Ed, what did you learn? What eye-opening experience did you see when you saw basically behind the scenes of the Board of Ed?
Well, I'm always like a big advocate for including parent voices, because I feel like no one cares as much about the success of the school system than parents, because we invest like what we care about the most. And our kids go to those schools for years and years, and we count on the schools for our kids' futures. So we want the schools to be successful, like more than anybody, I think. But what I did learn is that, parents have a variety of opinions. We're not like a, unilateral position. One parent may feel this way, other parents feel the other way. So it's about balancing out, the different needs, and it's not always an easy thing to please everyone. For example, when the schools were not open yet, a lot of people wanted them to be reopened. Some people were vehemently opposed to reopening of the schools,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you can't please everyone. You have to make decisions based on what's best for the greater good. And so that's kind of how my perspective has changed.
Okay. You can't, so every parent, no matter how loud they are, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get their way.
Yeah, because there could be just another faction that
Mhm.
feels just as strongly about the opposite.
And so that's one of the questions we get a lot. So, when we talk about a medical doctor, a person can have opinions, but we give deference to the science and to the medical doctor. Educators often feel like, and administrators feel like they're the experts. How do you balance that? How do you balance the expert opinion versus the parent, both who have a vested interest in the success of that child? Who gets the final say?
I feel that, definitely I'm not the expert. I'm a member of the community, and I keep that very clear. But we do count on the experts to guide us in certain directions. For example, knowing that, after a while, it became evident that the children were not doing well virtually. So my sense was, from my perspective, that we need the experts to tell us how to reopen the schools as safe as we can. So in that sense, we do rely on experts in that way. But I think the board is in charge of setting the direction and setting some goals. So in that sense, we can take the input from the community and advocate for certain positions. The other way that I think that we rely on the experts at this point, and I think we're going to need to going forward, is knowing that, the students did miss out on in-school learning last year. How are we going to catch them up? And I know I don't have the answers for that, but I'm really hoping that the administration, and I know that the teachers are working very hard to help them catch up. So I rely on the experts to tell us what's the plan, what's the answer for this.
Now, I realize you have not had the opportunity to be on the Board of Ed in normal times. You've had kind of crazy since you've gotten on. But in your opinion, what is the job of the Board of Education?
Well, it's not my opinion. It's kind of written in statute. So the job of the Board of Education is to set the policies. So in that way, you really can prioritize certain things, and also to set the budget. In my experience, the last year, we're approving a budget provided to us by the administration. So I think we need to ask a lot of questions about how decisions are being made, where the priorities are coming from. We need to voice what our priorities are as well. So those are some of the functions of the Board of Education, as well as really being advocates for the school system and making sure that public education is supported.
Okay, so let's talk about things like the budget or decisions that or curriculum decisions that come from the superintendent or the administration. In general, most parents have felt that the Board of Education has been sort of a rubber stamp for whatever the superintendent and the administration has wanted. And the superintendent isn't widely liked right now, but in general feels like Board of Ed members often don't say much or stand up often during meetings. Do you feel that's correct, and can that change?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know that feeling very, very, very well. Because like I said, before being a board member, I did go to several, a bunch of meetings, and I always noticed there was a lot of consensus. Things were proposed, and the Board of Education did go along, not all the time, but it was a very smooth process. I think the last year, though, I think there's been a lot more questioning. There's been a variety of different votes. Not everybody votes uniformly. And I do think that that's healthy. I mean, I think some people would like to see everything running smoothly and everybody being on the same page, but I do feel like dialogue enriches us. It doesn't mean that we have to be fighting or arguing, but we have to give voice to different ideas and then make the best decisions based on that. So I don't believe in being a rubber stamp, the opposite. I believe in asking a lot of questions. It's not easy to ask questions. You get up there, there's a lot of things to cover. You don't want to monopolize all the time, but I'm not afraid to ask questions or to stand on my own when I have to on certain issues. And I think that's important. And I think there's other independent-minded board members as well right now. So I think that makes us a better board. It might not be the easiest for the administration or for the superintendent, but hopefully it leads to better outcomes.
I can certainly support that you do speak up. There's no question about that. Now, just from an analysis standpoint, what would you say the strengths of Branford school system are?
Well, I have to say, number one, the teachers. Like my kids have been through a lot of teachers, and above and beyond, amazing individuals personally, and also educators, professionals. So with the teachers that we have, with the staff we have, and not only the teachers, everybody from the front office staff to the janitorial staff, even the bus drivers. I don't know if they're considered. Just the personnel that makes up the schools, we're just really blessed. So yeah, I think that's the number one strength. I also feel like just having parents who care so much, sometimes that leads to a lot of discussions and disagreements, but parents are engaged and involved, and I think that's really, really important. So I would say I would start with those two. I mean, we really have everything to succeed in this town. We have a town government that backs education. The funding is there. So there's a lot of strengths.
So let's say tomorrow I make you superintendent, and you go in day one, and the first thing you have to work on is what?
Okay, well, I'm not qualified to be superintendent, and I never want to pretend that I am. But if you're asking about what my priority is, oh, Steve, that's okay. Let me think. So I feel like the school climate has to set the conditions for success. So for all the people who are invested in the system, the students principally, and the teachers, but we need happy teachers to have students that are learning at their best, I believe. So for everyone to flourish, I think the school climate has to be looked at. And so, how do we how do we get teachers to feel like they're being heard, and how do we get collaborations that really work, and ideas that don't always come from the top, but that can emerge from, what's happening at the schools. I think an environment that's very collaborative, where people can flourish and feel like they can succeed. So yeah, the school climate.
You feel that's happening now or needs to be worked on?
Well, that would be my number one goal for improvement if I magically turn into a superintendent, which
okay, it's not going to happen. Okay.
No.
So, well, how do you? So, a couple years back, the state had some significant conversations about tests and outcomes, and how do you measure student success. Brantford is a very diverse town where we have a drastic difference in test scores and results based on what school that person went to, whether it's Tisco or Murphy or Sliney. How do you address that? How do you go after the disparity in test scores that we see in kids in Brantford?
Yeah, I mean, that's super important, I think. So again, I would count on educators to answer those questions for us. And I don't think it's impossible. Like, does one school need more resources than the others to kind of compensate the advantages that some of that, pool of students might have? To maybe, and that's what equity is, right? Equity means that everybody's given the tools to succeed with whatever they bring to the table, whether it's special needs or whether it's, people who may not have the family support that other students do. So I think as a board member, I would love to work with other board members to set goals that focus on equity. And we need further expertise. I'm not claiming that I know, how to do this or that, but I think setting goals has to be like a community process with some expertise.
And you don't feel like that's happening now?
Well, like you said, we've been in crisis for the last year, and we did have a conversation in the last board meeting. I don't know if anyone saw it. It was about setting goals. And at that point, it wasn't really clear whether the administration sets the goals or the board sets the goals. So I did read up on it this week. And from what I read from, the board's responsibility is to set goals. So I'm going to continue to advocate for us to sit together. And if I'm not here after November, I hope that the board will continue to do that and have a more strategic plan where we can address that. Some of the suggestions that have been put out there have been, for example, redistricting of the elementary schools. That's one idea to kind of mix things up. I don't really think that we have to take that dramatic step in order to bring more equity to our elementary schools. I feel like we need to try a lot of other things first because people like their neighborhood schools. My school is a block and a half away. We love walking there. That was Sliney. My daughter's not there anymore, but I know that people have an attachment to their elementary school. So I don't think that we need to take that drastic step before we try a series of other things.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about a couple issues that have been kind of ongoing issues with the school for a while. And one has to do with interaction with the public. There's forever discussion on whether or not Board of Education members should answer questions from the public at meetings. And so we have members asking questions. Some are maybe inappropriate, but some are very simple and easy to answer. But board members have had this rule that they do not answer questions at Board of Ed meetings. Do you believe that's the right approach?
No, I don't. I believe that we can have more back and forth, that people who make the effort to come to our meetings should be respected enough to receive an answer. I feel really dumb when somebody speaks up and they just, we stare blankly at them. I think that that's not the best approach. Again, I mean, we don't want to have meetings that last 4 hours, but we do want to have a dialogue when possible, All
right, so I want to ask you about two people. The first is when, after November, you will likely vote in a chairman. Talk to me about the job John Prince has done so far.
I gotta drink some water for this, wait.
And we'll make sure people know that it's water.
Yes. Okay, so yeah, I want to set a good example as a board member. Only water. So John Prince, he's a nice person. He's served for 20 years. I think that's commendable. This is a volunteer job, not always easy. So I didn't support John Prince for chairperson twice. We voted twice for some reason, and I supported Meredith Gaffney. So I kind of, like I said before, I believe in a collaborative approach, not a top-down approach. And I do feel like decision-making is centralized with the chairman. And I also feel that it parallels, its decision-making is really centralized also in the administration. And for the way that I am, I believe in a more collaborative approach where everybody's voices can be heard and counted. So I think in terms of who would be the leader next, I would have my eyes open for who else is willing to serve in that role.
Okay. I know you are a current Board of Ed member, so you have to be a little careful here, but you are still running for office, so you have to answer some questions.
Yeah.
Hamlin Hernandez gets an extension every year. He has another year or two, I believe, on his contract, and so far, we have not extended that contract. Can you give me an analysis, in your opinion, of the job Hernandez has done so far as Board of Ed Chair, Superintendent?
So I think, the last, and several of his reviews that have come out do call up the need for communication, improvement in communication. So that's public information, right? I think that the way that that's been interpreted is like communication, write more succinct emails or write more frequently. But I do feel that communication is also listening. And I have told this to Mr. Hernandez, is that I do feel like we have to listen and take in input and incorporate it into our decision making. So in that sense, I've been frank with him about how I feel. But I really can't, talk about like, a lot of this is personnel stuff. So, and a lot of this discussion happens under executive session. So I really feel like if I keep talking a lot, I'm probably going to mess up and just divulge something from executive session. So is it okay to leave it at that? You can ask me about extension if you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate getting permission for a question. But I get the role you're in, but you're also a candidate. And so,
yeah.
While his personnel file is executive session and that's behind closed doors, we understand that. The public has been talking about his performance for quite some time. And there are pros and cons, and we talked about that before. If you had to say there has not been a vote to date on an extension, and considering that it's September 21st, I would imagine, we'll ask first, as a current member, would you put that vote off till the new Board of Education comes on?
I think that there's a case to be made for that. I would be ready to submit my vote whenever I have the opportunity.
And how would you vote?
Well, again, because it's an ongoing matter, I'm not going to say how I'm going to vote right now, but I'm going to point you to the last extension vote, which was in May 20th of 2020. And at that time, I did not support an extension. I was the only member not to vote yes. I abstained. I was a brand new member. That was one of my first votes, but I was the only person to abstain, and I just couldn't get myself to yes at that time. But in terms of this, whatever's coming up next, I can't really, broach that topic because it's ongoing. Okay. The other, in May 2020, that's already public record that you can see that in a meeting. Yeah. So I'm trying to be very careful here.
Okay, understood. Okay, so I think we have a good feel for where you are. Brett just commented, Cristy is the main architect of the 4 Democratic BOE candidates platform. Brett, we're going to interview people individually. I don't necessarily matter what the Democratic or Republican platform is. I would imagine all members have the same concerns for students and for teachers, no matter what their political affiliation. So we'll just stick to an individual's ideas as opposed to a political platform. That said, Cristy, we have a few minutes left. Give me your speech. Why should you've been on for a year and a half. Why should you be reelected or elected to the Board of Ed again?
Well, let me just go back to Brett. I think during this interview, like now I'm an architect, I love it. And then I was a superintendent momentarily. So I'm really getting a lot of professions. So the main reason, and I think you know this, Steve, from talking to me, I think that we just need to put the kids at the center of every decision we made as a board, as a community. I truly believe that. I truly believe that the kids have to be at the center of every decision. And I have that as my mantra. Every meeting I go into just really thinking about that strongly and not trying to get caught up in a lot of the conflict. Passions do run very high with a lot of issues with the board, but I think always centering what I do in hoping that my actions will lead to better outcomes for the kids in the whole community. So the other thing that and this might be a little controversial, but the other thing that I do really strongly believe in, and if I continue to be on the board, I would like to see a policy for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I just want to define that a little bit because I know that they can get kind of tied up. There's a lot of national discussion about
CRT, yep.
Yes, but I just really want to define what that means for Brantford. So I feel that what diversity means is that we have to appreciate the qualities that every kid brings to the table, whether it's race, ethnicity, religious background, gender identity. I strongly believe that we have to make every kid feel valued, not regardless of race, but along with and as a whole person. So that to me is diversity, and inclusion means, like, different communities in Brantford have different obstacles in trying to get to break down those barriers so that everybody can have a successful experience. So for example, one of the things that we could do in inclusion would be having like a Spanish or a language translator in parent conferences. And then finally, we already talked about equity, what it means to make sure that everybody who comes to our system can really truly flourish, and how can we address the things that get in the way. To me, the other issue that matters a lot is students with special education needs. And for example, one of the ways that we can continue to address that is provide compensatory services, because we know that they suffered most greatly during the pandemic. A lot of them couldn't get the usual services virtually. So just thinking about all those things is what I will bring to the table if I get the privilege of doing that. And I think that's one more thing that I want to say, that I don't take this lightly, this role lightly. I think it is a complete privilege. It's an honor. It's not an easy job, but I'm happy to do it as long as I have the opportunity. In that sense, I also want to say the last word, that I know that you don't like jargon like transparency and other things, but accountability. I do feel like I'm accountable to the community and to individuals out there. Even if I vote in a way that I don't agree, that they don't agree with me, or I had a chat with somebody about masks the other day, and I had to explain that I voted for the masks, and because I had to make the decision based on not taking any chances with the health of our children and our staff. So I'm accountable to everybody in the community, and I feel that very strongly, and I don't take it lightly. And I think that's the difference between being a new member. I know that John always says, oh, new members, yeah, maybe we don't know a lot about the procedures, but I know that we don't take this lightly, and we know that we represent the community. We don't forget that. We're not entitled to this role.
Well,
so
I can say,
my speech.
No, that was a good speech, and I'm glad you talked a little bit about inclusion and CRT and the masks, because those have been controversial. Thankfully, we haven't seen the CRT issue here in Brantford yet. We may. It's becoming a national political issue, so I don't know that it's a significant issue here, but somebody could make it one, so that may happen. Masks, it seems to have died down with this pandemic kind of coming up, but that was certainly at some meetings. People were passionate about that as well. I will say this, and a little bit of editorializing. I have watched you and seen you involved for the last 7-8 years. I know how passionate you are, and I know that you're not hesitating to let your viewpoint be known. And so that's a good thing, and I can certainly vouch for that. And I want to thank you for your efforts on the playground, and thank you for your time on the Board of Ed so far.
Thank you, Steve. Steve, you also helped raise money for the playground, so I want to give you credit for that as well.
That's great.
Yeah,
we did. We actually got some businesses involved, and they made some nice checks for that too. So what really was the whole community coming together. Now, there's still some question of whether we should have waited a year or two to wait for the senior center to be done. But in any event, you have a new playground. It got moved a little bit, but it's still beautiful. Yeah. Okay, Cristy, I thank you. Thanks for coming on. Thank you for serving.
Thank you.
Likely talk to you again before Election Day.
I would be happy to. Okay.
All right.
Thanks
you.
for the opportunity. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Okay, so, and I mean that when I say that. We covered, the first time I met Cristy was some parents. The playground near Hammer Field before it was redone was in bad shape. And it started under DeRoss, and then Cosgrove has kind of done this as well. We've redone pretty much all the playgrounds in town. And that's Alex Paluzzi has done that through multiple administrations. There's no political thing with that. It's just gotten done. There was a push to get it done. It became political on the RTM. There were some claims that probably shouldn't have been made on how dangerous they were, or one kid getting medical issues. That said, the community came together. A group of us did work together to raise money from local businesses. And it's beautiful, and it's done. And playgrounds have actually been, and this goes back to the last days of DeRoss through Cosgrove, so it's not just one administration. They've been a focus on for the town for quite some time. And a lot of that has to do with Paluzzi. Paluzzi's put a lot of money. They have a fund that comes from beyond the town, that comes from classes they teach or things of that nature, and a lot of that money is going back into that. So she's certainly been active for a long time. We do have this issue of some members are still on the board, so they have to be careful about what they say. We're going to respect that. They can say what they'd like and what they're comfortable saying. That said, Jack just mentioned here that the assessment was put forward, I think, in the Register article. There's a problem with, I don't want to say there's a problem with that article, but there's a problem with the process here. If you watch the next meeting, no vote took place on that document. So they had an executive session. No votes took place in the executive session. That document was written and filed before the next meeting, with no votes being taken at that next meeting. So it may not be appropriate for me to say, do you stand behind that document? Because they may not have had any role in writing that document. I don't know if it was John Prince who wrote it. It was overly flowery in some areas. In my opinion, didn't say much. But if you don't have the votes and the backing of all the members of the Board of Education in a public vote for that document is meaningless. Now, I can see the superintendent or employees pushing to have a letter. That's basically a letter recommendation for a future job. So there's something that goes, or employee will say, hey, can I have a really good recommendation, especially if he has not been given an extra year, an extension on his contract. But that article in the Register leaves out some really key facts that I don't see a record of Board of Ed members voting in favor of that assessment. And going into the next meeting, it appeared that assessment was written and filed before the meeting. That could be a problem. Now, it's 6 weeks before an election. It may not be a problem worth addressing, but it could be a problem. And that may be addressed by the next Board of Ed. Okay, so tomorrow, Brett is on here now. Tomorrow, Brett will be here at 4 o'clock. We'll talk to him. We have a little more freedom with him because he is not, it says perhaps because he's not a member now. And Brett, I don't know. I've never met Brett. So unlike Cristy and most of the other members, I'll get to meet him at the same time as much of our audience. Jack, perhaps Prinz and Hernandez wrote it. We don't have answers yet. I'm looking into that, but we don't have answers. There's a problem with some of the articles that are written is here's a document and it's the assessment or the superintendent. Because I have history in the town and have history what's going on with the Board of Ed, I can say, hold on, something doesn't sound right. And I read that document and said, there is no way in hell half of these Board of Ed members wrote this. There's simply no way in hell half of the Board of Ed members wrote that. So a journalist for the Register may not know the makeup of the town and say, okay, I'm just put this article out, but it's not really accurate. You have to be part of the town to know what's going on. And so I questioned some of that. Until I get more information, I'll hold off on reporting anything on it. That said, we'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for Cristy for coming on. We'll be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock with Brett. And until then, I hope you all have a great night, and I will see you later.